Next up is Sinan Aral, who is a son of MIT, who spent some time at NYU. We've recruited him back to the Institute. We're pleased to have him here. Sinan is going to MC the next 4 or 5 presentations in the social analytics and experimentation pillar. Welcome, Sinan.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Okay, so very pleased to be here, and for the next 2 hours you're going to hear a little bit about the journey partners, as was just described, on one of our particular verticals, which is social analytics and experimentation. And the great thing about MIT is that when you collect a bunch of really energetic and curious people together and let them do whatever they want with their journey partners, you can ask and answer and tackle some really interesting and difficult problems. So let me describe to you a little bit our thinking in developing this pillar, what we're trying to go after and why we're trying to go after it. And then I'll introduce along the way some of the people who are going to present the research that's being done in this pillar. So first off, we began really with 3 trends that we think are really important to not only the way consumer behavior is evolving, but society and human behavior in general is evolving. The first one of these is digital. Most of the behaviors that we engage in today are becoming digitized. Most of the offline behaviors that we engage in today are becoming supported by digital infrastructure. Every time we move around, every time we connect with someone in communication, every time we exercise, it is supported in some way by a digital substrate. And this has a couple of implications. The first of which is that it is a new way of behaving and interacting in a digital sense. And a second one is that it produces a data exhaust of human behavior that can be analyzed for insights. The second major trend is the fact that most of this is happening in a mobile context. And by that, I don't necessarily mean mobile phones. I mean the fact that the car is going to be internet-enabled and connected. I mean that when you go for a run, you have a chip in your shoe that is providing you quantified self-data about how you're doing when you're running. So it's about people moving in space and time in a digitally enabled sort of substrate. And the third major trend is social. So there is a cacophony of digitized and automated, but also personally enabled digital social signals that we are constantly bombarded with every day. I wake up, the first thing that I do, and I know this is a horrible thing to admit to in public, the first thing I do is I reach for my phone, if I haven't slept with it in my hand, and I just start scrolling through all of the different messages on Twitter, Instagram, news feeds, Facebook, and so on and so forth. And I just want you to think about the fact that not one of these types of social signals existed more than 7 years ago. And now it is the primary source of information, and it is the way that we connect with all of our social networks. So what does this mean? Well, if you take these 3 together and you think about your average consumer, let me tell you a little bit about how your average consumer is behaving today. She is checking Facebook every 37 minutes. She's posting to Instagram at least 5 times a day. She's reviewing on Yelp 4 times per week. She's updating Twitter approximately every hour, and she's getting younger and younger and younger and younger. Okay? All of this kind of activity in the digital substrate is creating one important condition that we want to think about in addressing the problems that we're interested in. And that one condition is the tremendous amount of data that's being generated by this new paradigm of human behavior in the digital, mobile, and social sort of transformation of human behavior. For instance, 60 hours of video is posted to YouTube every minute. And by the time I finish this list, they will be out of date and probably much higher than when I started. 1,000 photos are posted to Instagram every minute, 340 million tweets per day, 700 billion minutes spent on Facebook per day, 158 items purchased on Amazon every second, 1 billion Instagram likes per day. And what is this creating? It's creating a data deluge, just like the economist described. So what we want to do is we want to think about these three trends and this one condition and what the implications of these might be for human behavior, for consumption, for demand, for business strategy, and so on. And there are many far-reaching implications. For instance, how does it affect commerce? This is a UK Wired cover article that says, "Commerce gets social, how your networks are driving what you buy." And the implication is that when you see things that are liked or shared, that this is going to create ebbs and flows of demand in society. So studying how that sharing process is affecting consumer demand is one really important element that we're thinking about in this pillar. But another one is that it's not just about commerce. It's also about social movements. For instance, the Arab Spring. How does sharing and all of this sort of communication in these digital social networks create ebbs and flows of people going out into the square and protesting or fighting for different types of social change? It's not just about either of those two, it's also about how we vote, right? There was an experiment done on Facebook that showed that social proof in advertisements for Get Out the Vote campaigns can increase the amount of voting that happens. And if one side is doing this better than the other, read the book The Victory Lab. There could be dramatic implications for who wins in a political election. It's not just about voting, though. It's also about our exercise behaviors and our diet behaviors. We have a big project with Nike, which I'll describe, in which we're analyzing some of this sort of data. So when we think about this social analytics and experimentation pillar of the IDE, we're working with a lot of different amazing journey partners to try and answer some pretty fundamental questions around how social behavior affects demand, how it affects exercise behaviors and our health, how it affects social movements, how it affects voting, and obviously how it affects personalized social advertising, viral product design, and so on. And we're really trying to follow two complementary research programs that fit together, okay? The first one is studying in detail social networks and how social networks are evolving over time, how information diffuses over social networks, how social influence from one person to the other in demand for products, in the likelihood of exercise, and so on, ebbs and flows through society. And we have a number of big network studies which have observations in the tens or hundreds of millions. We just completed an experiment with Facebook which included 250 million people in a randomized experiment. And that is the second research program that we're interested in, which is this notion of experimentation. The idea that you can conduct experiments at scale, the scale of populations rather than 20 individual students in a room at an unnamed New England university, is that when you have experiments that are of 250 million people, you can not only estimate the average treatment effect for a particular intervention, but you can estimate the distribution of treatment effects across subsets of the population. What do I mean? I mean, if I want to present a new product or intervention, how will women respond differently than men? How will people over the age of 55 respond differently than people under the age of 30? How will people in the Northeast respond differently than people in the Southwest? If you have a statistically speaking highly powered experiment, you can estimate this distribution of treatment effects. If you only have 20 students in a room, you can only estimate the average treatment effect. And to understand why that's so important, we just conducted an experiment that involved 17 million impressions on a website like Reddit. And what we found was there were two groups in the population that had very strong treatment effects that were countervailing. One was a very strong positive treatment effect, and one was a very strong negative treatment effect. And when we estimated the average effect of instituting this policy in the population, our answer was 0. But when we estimated the distribution, we found that this population will respond negatively and this one will respond positively, and that leads to tailored policy, personalized policy. So we're addressing several critical topics, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time, so I won't go into them. But social network marketing, personalized social advertising, social listening, website morphing, viral product design, optimal referral incentives, social health interventions, and all of this in the context of large-scale experimentation and multivariate testing.